Oh, perfect. Hello, hi Grace. Perfect, we'll start straight away. So for those who don't know me, my name is Julie Prendeville. I am founder of Enriching English and creator of the Enriching English program. So it's a 10-week program based on strategies linking reading, writing and oral language. So basically today's live was brought on because of the poll I did from yesterday's live. So 33% of people said that they did not have a structure to their English lessons, and 100% of people said that their students were not aware of the structure to their English lessons. So this is going to bring me on to two things today. So I'm going to discuss the main aspects and techniques that you need to have in your English lessons, which will help you create and form an English lesson. So it'll give you the structure. Now, those of you who are doing the Enriching English program will already have a structure based on the strategies I have taught you throughout the program. So these tonight, I'm just going to give you different aspects and techniques you can implement in your English lesson straight away, so you can sort it around and create your own structure. Then the next thing I will discuss is I'm going to tell you about the benefits of actually explaining to your students the structure of the English lessons. Okay, so you'll see as we go along as well that reading, writing and oral language, they are all linked. Okay, so there was an overlap in the reading, writing and oral language. Now again, there's such a broad curriculum to reading, writing and oral language in English. It is excellent that they overlap, so it's saving us time. So the first thing we'll do is go over some of the aspects you have to have, or the main aspects I would encourage you to have in your English lessons. So we'll start off, for example, with reading. So if you decide the first thing you're going to do is reading in your English lesson, you have to decide first what type of reading. Now this is also aimed at homeschoolers who are homeschooling. So the reading can be individual, which means the child reads on their own. Paired reading, the child reads with another partner, so in pairs. And also group reading. So I would encourage you to have max there of 4 in a group, and mixed ability pairs. So when you have mixed ability pairs, that means it gives the children an opportunity to peer teach. Okay, so if someone gets stuck on a word, you don't have to run to every group. With the mixed ability pairs, the child who is well able to read and is a fluent reader can then help the child who is not so fluent. Okay, so if you keep them in mixed ability pairs, it will help them to peer teach. Now again, you need to explain to them at the start of the year, especially when they enter your classroom, how you're expecting them to read. Okay, so you can't just let them read in groups and they can just be muttering through it. You have to explain, for example, certain aspects. Like when it comes to a full stop, you have a 2-second pause. Okay, so when they read the sentence, they actually get a little bit of flow, but they give themselves time to breathe. Okay, this is especially for the younger classes. When there is a comma, they get 1-second pause. So in their head, they can go 1 and then continue. Full stop is 1, 2. Okay, little elements like that will help the group reading and will also help that individual reading. Okay, then the next thing you need is discussion within your English lesson. Now this is for your reading lesson. So if you're going to do a reading lesson, you read through the page and answer questions with no discussion. You have to ask yourself what they're actually learning out of that. You are really only targeting the student who can comprehend things really quickly. So if the first question is, who is the main character? Majority of students will look for the name that's mentioned the most amount of times. And for example, they'll say Tom is the main character, but they mightn't know why he is the main character. So you need to actually form a discussion around the questions. Now it has to be a focused discussion. So if you're going to get them to discuss in groups, it needs to be time focused and the discussion needs to be focused. So you need to say, okay, you are discussing the characteristics of Tom. You have got 3 minutes. Turn your timer 3 minutes. Okay, they have to come up with 3 characteristics. So there it's very specific and they are discussing under a time limit, so it's focused. Okay, so that keeps them on task. So you've group discussions, you can have whole class discussions, which is one person speaking. The next thing you need to have is your critical thinking. Okay, now here's where the strategies come in when you're reading. So for example, last week I went through the senses, which was concentrating on adjectives. So when they read the passage, you might say, okay, what could you see or what could you hear within that passage? So they are now critically thinking and they have to actually reread what they've just read. Okay, there has to be an element of critical thinking in your English lessons. The next one is creativity. So students and children automatically, they're going to be creative. They're naturally creative. Okay, so you need to encourage this. So for example, if you have a passage about Tom, you could actually say, okay, I want you to imagine what he looks like. Okay, hands up who can describe what Tom looks like. So here you're using the see adjectives, but you're also tipping into there the creativity of the child. Next is the objective of the lesson. Now this is the last one I'm going to go through today for a reading lesson. You have to have an objective to your lesson, but also share it with the students. There is no point you saying, okay, I'm going to concentrate on adjectives, but the students go through the lesson, you've discussed adjectives, but they didn't realize that was the aim. Okay, so it's like you they don't have a purpose to the lesson, so therefore they don't have the aim. By the end of the lesson, I'm going to know 5 new adjectives. Okay, give them the objective that started the lesson, and then see at the very end, okay, have we reached our objectives? Can we name 5 new adjectives? Okay, so this will focus the students and it will encourage them to participate in the lesson. So that's the reading. So you start off with reading, so individual, paired, group, whatever reading you choose, and remember, give them key aspects to reading. Then with discussion, it needs to be focused and it needs to be under time limit because you need to keep them on task. Critical thinking, so reading strategies need to be in there. Creativity, and you need to give them the objective to their lesson. Okay, so they need to be all involved in a reading lesson. Because you're structuring the lesson now, you will fit these all in. Okay, so if you don't structure it, you're not going to fit them all in because they're not going to flow nicely throughout the lesson. Okay, the next one is your oral language lessons. Now again, I actually shared, if you look on my page, you'll see a picture from SPR Creative Beauty. Now on Facebook, she actually has a page, SPR Creative Beauty, and in the albums, there's an Enriching English album. Here you will find loads of illustrations taken from other books. Okay, so what actually happens in an Enriching English lesson is I put up the illustration on the board that is drawn by SPR Creative Beauty, and immediately that taps into the curiosity of the child. They immediately put up their hand, they want to know who the author is and what the book is. Okay, so the discussions have already started. If you're starting an oral language lesson without the child being curious, it's going to be a drag because you're trying to draw the language out of them. Instead, you want them to give you the language so you can help them along. So make them curious about what they're actually going to discuss. So I do that again every Monday. As I said yesterday, the picture goes up and they immediately discuss who the author is and what the picture is about. Okay, creative. So again, it's overlapping with the reading. So a child is naturally creative. Okay, so it's up to us to maintain that. So by putting the illustration up on the board and asking to children to recreate the story without using the same storyline as the author, let's say it was J.K. Rowling, without using the same storyline as J.K. Rowling. What they're doing is you're now being creative, but they're also thinking about the language that J.K. Rowling uses. So you've really tapped into the curiosity and the creativity there with that illustration. The next and last thing to do with the presentation or oral language is your presentation skills. You cannot ask a child to step in front of a classroom and speak if you haven't shown them how to present or give them the techniques on how to present. If you were asked to step in front of a crowd yourself and present, how would you feel if you didn't know how to? Okay, that's what you need to think. You need to put yourself in their shoes. Okay, I'm asking them to step in front of the class here, but have I actually shown them the presentation skills? So one is, for example, immediately when they come into my class, I teach them eye contact. So you look towards the crowd, you either look above them if they're a little bit nervous, or look at their ears. Okay, if a child tries to avoid eye contact, encourage them to look at their ear, and it will actually get them to focus on the people they're looking at rather than the board, because if they look away, it's going to be overshadowed, or looking down on the ground. So you really want to teach them those techniques. And again, you need to look at, so presentation skills, you need to look at the structuring of the sentence. Okay, so if your oral language lesson is based on presentations, you need to keep in mind any child they're going to speech and language therapy, for example. If they find structuring a sentence difficult or challenging, you need to make sure they're comfortable coming in front of the class. Okay, so you need to make sure they have practiced. Now, if you know you're going to do this, you can ask them, okay, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to practice your presentation within your group. Then you can walk over to the child that you know that needs that little bit of extra help and make sure he or she is prepared to step in front of the class. Okay, so then we had, within that oral language there, we had curiosity, creativity, and the presentation skills. Okay, the last one we have is our writing lessons. Okay, the writing lessons, the elements you need to have, again, are discussion. So when you're introducing a writing genre, for example, you have recounts or narratives. Narratives are the one... Thank you. Do not fear to lose, but seek to win is a motto I use a lot in my classroom. Thank you, Caroline. Okay, so our writing lessons, we have discussion. So if you're introducing a recount, for example, or a narrative is your normal story. You need to have discussion around this before you get them to write. So show them examples up on the board. Now this can be linked to your reading lesson, so you don't need to do a completely different reading lesson. You can bring it back to the reading. So read a narrative and discuss what the techniques are. Then we have, so you introduce it and you have your samples, then the techniques involved. You also need to explain to your students what's actually required of them. So what does the author use in the example that I need to use in my own writing? Okay, this will help them with peer assessment and self-assessment. If you don't actually show them clearly, for example, okay, we're concentrating on capital letters and in a narrative I want 5 paragraphs. You need to give them specific aims. Okay, so now you can give them individual aims if you want. So for example, if a child really finds spelling challenging, step back from the spelling. Okay, and for the first draft, just say, okay, I want you to concentrate on being creative. Forget about your spelling for the first draft and we'll concentrate on spelling in the next draft. Okay, so you really need to give them that space and be specific about what you're expecting from the children and what they're expecting from themselves. So each of them should have a different aim. With peer assessment, you need to make sure that they are able to do that. Why? Because it's reinforcing what you've just taught them. So if they can't peer assess, you really need to think about, are they fully understanding what is required of them when they're writing a narrative, for example. In my classroom, I get them to peer assess using the same marking scheme that I use. So for example, I have C with a circle around it for capital letters. So when I get them swap their writing, I say, okay, I want you all to peer assess. If they see a capital letter is missing, they put a C around it, or a C and then a circle around it, pass it back to their partner. I will be doing the exact same thing to their writing when I collect the third draft. So I do not collect the second draft, they appear correct, I get they rewrite it again and I get the third draft. So therefore they're reinforcing the learning and it is active learning. So it's not a silent writing lesson. Now there is times when a writing lesson needs to be silent, but they do need to learn from each other. There needs to be fun and there needs to be discussion. Okay, so here we had for the writing lesson, we had the elements you need to introduce, the techniques involved, we had self-assessment, peer assessment and peer teaching. Okay, which is the corrections. So with your reading, writing and oral language, why do you need to explain that to the students? What are the benefits? The benefits, by explaining that to the students, you will actually give your students a purpose. Okay, you're giving them a focus. They are now understanding what's involved in English. They will also lead. That leadership skill is essential. So when you're starting off your English lesson, you say oral language. What is oral language? And they should be able to say, okay, it's how we speak, how we form sentences. If they don't understand what oral language is, you're really going to lose them within the lesson. They don't understand their objectives, what they're aiming towards. So for example, you have, okay, we're going to concentrate on eye contact and its presentation skills. They can stand up confidently, use their eye contact, and at the end of the lesson say, okay, I achieved my objectives, I've eye contact completed. Move on to the next strategy. Okay, so that's one thing they're going to do, is give them purpose. The next thing is leadership. Now, I teach my students every year 3 aspects to the lessons. So reading, I get them to all say, I am a critical thinker. So they understand what critical thinking is, and they understand in every English lesson, reading lesson, they are critical thinkers. In the oral language lesson, they know that they are teachers. So I am a teacher. Why? Because they're presenting to the class, they are peer teaching. Within their, so that was the oral language, within their writing, it is I am an author. Immediately when they say I am an author when I'm writing, they're going to think of their favourite authors. So it brings them from being a student to now giving them confidence, saying you are an author, so I want you to think of your favourite author who writes narratives. And I want you to see, is there any techniques you like that they use that you can now use within your own writing. So it's I'm a critical thinker, I am a teacher, and I am an author. Okay. Overall so we've gone through structuring your lessons and we've gone through the benefits of it. So if you have any questions, make sure to direct message me throughout the week, or else get involved in the polls. So when I put up the polls, this is really feedback from the lives, so I can, in the next live, I will know what you want to have discussed. So if you have any questions at all, direct message me, get involved in the polls, and I'll see you in the next live. Bye, thank you for joining.